I may sound like a broken record considering I did a whole video gushing about this movie already, but nonetheless, I feel the need to needlessly express my love for the first Predator movie. To this day, it is still one of my favorite movies of all time. Again, I have an entire video explaining why I love this movie so much, so I won't go too much deeper other than to say it is one of the finest action horror films I have ever seen. So today I'm going to be talking about its sequel, but despite the title of this video, I do have to admit that whereas Predator is freaking awesome, Predator 2 doesn't even come close. It is a step down from the first film in almost every way, and to be frank, I do honestly get where people are coming from when they say they hate this movie. The film is directed by Stephen Hopkins, who was brought on after impressing producer Joel Silver with his work on A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. There are areas in Predator 2 where he really excels, such as his direction of the action sequences, which are a major highlight of the film. Furthermore, Stan Winston returns to do the special effects, and while I wouldn't say Predator 2 features his best work, what is on display is pretty stellar, especially for the 90s. Alan Silvestri also returns to score the film, and his music is one of the only things in this movie that I think is just as good as it was in the first. The score is fantastic. However, despite the film having a much larger budget than the first film, Predator 2 is unpolished and even looks cheaper by comparison, and not in a flattering way. That being said, in spite of the problems I have with it, which I will be discussing throughout this video, I do have a soft spot for Predator 2, because for all its faults, it does actually have a lot going for it. So much so that I think the film is undeserving of the bad reputation it's garnered since its release in 1990. To begin with, Predator 2 trades the wilderness for a bustling city in the midst of a war between the police and a collection of criminal syndicates. Unfortunately, the city setting isn't as visually arresting as the jungle from the first film, and it also doesn't have the hostile and unwelcoming sense of isolation. Although wisely, what elevates the city setting is the familiarity. The first movie draws much of its tension from the idea that those soldiers were stuck in an unfamiliar territory being hunted by an unseen enemy. Predator 2 does a similar thing, but the city setting has a disconcerting layer of dread added to it because the inclusion of the Predator, as well as a crime war, takes the familiar location and makes it feel unsafe. Overall, it's the only film in this series that takes the Predator out of the wilderness completely and into a totally new environment, and it does a pretty okay job of it all things considered. The film begins with a banger of an opening scene, immediately throwing you into the thick of the action wherein the police are in a shootout with a heavily armed gang. It's a terrific set piece with amazing stunt work and one of my favourite explosions ever captured on film. To top it all off, a Predator shows up. The scene sets up the rest of the film so well because the cops are in the midst of a gang war and are doing everything in and out of the book to try and stop it, when all of a sudden, an alien monster comes out of nowhere to complicate things even further. It's a legitimately great setup. This sequence also has one of my favourite moments in the entire series where the cops are cautiously making their way through a building towards a room to catch the aforementioned gang, but you can hear the gang members screaming in terror as the Predator rips them to shreds behind the door. The film never cuts back to the gang after the Predator crashes in, opting to stay on the cops almost the entire time and only allowing us to hear their screaming. It's absolutely chilling sound design. We only get to see the gruesome aftermath, which is just the cherry on top for building suspense and foreshadowing what's to come. The film features many of the trademarks of a cop movie, such as the rebellious detective who doesn't like to do things by the book, and the angry police chief who's just generally quite sick of his rebellious attitude. However, the film does play out in a similar vein to a neo-noir detective thriller, with a police detective investigating the murders of a serial killer. Sadly, the plot generally lacks the unpredictability of the first film, and while not bad, it is a lot more by the numbers. The film never takes the opportunity the first film had, which was to use the Predator's inclusion to subvert the genre or even elevate it. It runs through the cop movie cliches like a checklist, without doing much of anything new with them, to the point where you can really see where the film is going pretty quickly. The characters are fine. They're nowhere near as memorable as the characters from the first film, and they honestly don't have a lot to work with in order to elevate themselves beyond their character archetypes. They don't get much deeper than the rebellious detective, the cocky rookie, the partner with not long left until retirement, etc. That being said, Danny Glover as Mike Harrigan proves to be a good enough protagonist. He gives a delightfully over-the-top and big performance which more than makes up for the character's simplicity. Overall, the cast do have a camaraderie that is fun because they all play off each other really well. well, but while they are likable, they don't have the development and setup the characters in the first film did, so when they're inevitably picked off by the Predator, their deaths don't have enough impact. I do quite like Gary Busey as Peter Keyes. I'm not going to pretend like this villain is anything particularly special, but Busey's cheesy performance makes him an entertaining presence. Additionally, the idea of a secret government organization tasked with hunting down and studying the Predators is a good one, and what we do get to see of this team is really interesting. I honestly wish the film had delved into this a lot more. My biggest issue with the movie is that the Predator is revealed far too early. Yes, it is Predator 2, so I imagine even by this point audiences knew what they were getting, but this choice does take away the sense of mystery the first film had. It's also detrimental to the pacing, especially in the second act of the film, because you're watching the characters play catch up as they slowly piece together what we already know, and it's honestly a drag. But still, this Predator is rather interesting. The Predator in the first movie emulated the traits of a guerrilla soldier, using guerrilla tactics to pick off its victims one by one. While this Predator still does things like collecting spines and skulls of the people it kills as trophies, this Predator operates more like a serial killer by comparison. I like how this film takes behaviors and actions committed by the Predator in the first film to emphasize the idea of this Predator as a serial killer. For example, when the first Predator skinned its victims and strung them up, it felt like a display of power. When this Predator does it, it comes across more like it's trying to draw the attention of the characters. This Predator is quite sadistic in that way, as throughout the film it toys with the characters, especially Harrigan, as it seems to take an interest in him from the get-go. Almost every action the Predator takes is intended to gain Harrigan's attention or mess with him, even going as far to target those closest to him. While it's not particularly nuanced, and again you don't feel too much for the characters the Predator kills, it does add a personal element that makes the conflict between Harrigan and the Predator fairly engaging, because it gives Harrigan more reason to go after the Predator beyond trying to stop it from murdering people. To add to the tension, the Predator never gives Harrigan a moment's rest as it tails him through the city and even sends him reminders that the hunter is close. After it kills Mike's friend and partner Danny, the Predator follows the detective as he visits his friend's grave and leaves Danny's necklace hanging from a tree for Mike to find. The moment where Harrigan slowly approaches the necklace is pretty suspenseful, as we know the Predator is somewhere close by and could pop out at any time. I am fond of how personal of an attack this is from the Predator, because it effectively sets up the rivalry between these two characters by showing the Predator is doing everything it can to goad Mike into going after it. It's also cool seeing the Predator using some new gadgetry and weaponry this time around, such as the net gun and the smart disc, but I won't lie, my favourite of these is easily the spear. There's just something about the Predator wielding a spear that is just so epic. Although there are some really goofy things about this Predator that prevent it from living up to the first. At one point, the Predator runs into a kid who thinks it's a ghost and even tries offering it candy. It's a ridiculous scene that kind of makes the Predator look rather silly, considering this is a creature we've seen scar muscle-bound soldiers to their core, and yet it can't even elicit a shiver from a literal child. The film also uses the creature's ability to mimic people in a rather odd way. The Predator talks a lot more in this one than it did in the first, and it just doesn't work. This ability was used very minimally in the first film, which meant that whenever the Predator did mimic someone, it was terrifying, because you genuinely had no idea whether it was one of the characters or the Predator luring someone to their death. I just can't take it seriously here, because the Predator just seems to like saying strange things to people for no reason. Whenever the Predator swears at people or offers candy before killing its victims, I honestly bust a gut laughing at how stupid it sounds. Luckily, the third act is where the film really picks up. We finally get the scene where Danny Glover learns everything about the Predator in a really cool sequence where Gary Busey and his team try to capture the Predator by camouflaging themselves in a similar vein to Dutch, who used similar methods to fight the Predator in the first film. However, this time that doesn't work, and we're treated to a great sequence where the Predator just annihilates this entire team. Following that, it's just Danny Glover versus the Predator. Both of these characters are viciously trying to kill each other, using everything at their disposal, and it's really entertaining. I do wish their final fight was bloodier, but it's both badass and satisfying seeing Harrigan using the Predator's own weapons against it. It's a more physical final confrontation than the first, and sure, Harrigan killing the Predator with its own weapons may not be as interesting or even as clever as Dutch setting traps and using the Predator's own tactics against it, but the sequence is really well done, has plenty of variety and scale, with the fight going from a warehouse to a rooftop and finally into the Predator's own ship, but most importantly, the film builds up to this fight admirably, making Harrigan's clash with the creature feel gratifying. However, the best part of the whole movie is after Danny Glover wins the fight, only to be greeted by more predators. In a fabulous twist, it's revealed that the predators are a clan-based society who have been on Earth hunting humans for hundreds of years. This revelation ensures the film ends on a high note, and we even learn the predators hunt other species on other worlds as we see a trophy case harboring the skulls of creatures they vanquished on their travels, including a fucking xenomorph. The ending is this movie's secret weapon. Time has weirdly been kind to this film, as over the years we've seen the release of countless remakes and sequels produced with the purpose of recovering the success Hollywood had in the 1980s, sometimes the 90s, sometimes even going back as far as the 50s. Even in the Predator franchise itself, there have been installments that tried to recapture the spark of the original Predator movie, whether it's by recreating everything about the first, or having scenes that cater to audiences with a nostalgia connection. Now, I'm not going to pretend I haven't found joy at all in this phase of franchise filmmaking. However, despite this film releasing in 1990, watching Predator 2 is actually rather refreshing today. Yes, it does retain the basic premise of the Predator hunting people for sport, but we have brand new characters and a totally new location. On top of that, other than Prey, this movie, I'd say more than most of the films in this franchise, feels like an expansion. Yes, The Predator also takes place in a civilized area and does touch on the lore, to put it nicely, but one, Predator 2's city setting is far more expansive and is used better, and two, the film builds upon everything established about the Predators in the first film rather than retconning everything we know about them. Predator 2 is a step forward as opposed to a step backwards. It's a film that's different enough from the first film to stand on its own while acting as a worthy continuation. Predator 2 is a very flawed film, and it doesn't even come close to matching the first, but I do have a soft spot for it because of everything it gets right. They actually tried to bring the Predator to a completely new environment and tell a different story that expands the Predator mythos. While it definitely doesn't succeed in every aspect, the film makes a decent enough attempt at being a worthy follow-up to the first film, and there are enough things going for the movie to enable me to look past its flaws and appreciate the film for what it is. Again, I totally get why someone would dislike this film. Its issues are pretty plain to see, but I think its virtues are enough to warrant the film another look.